I'd like to introduce Christine McSherry from the Jett Foundation.
Thank you, Dr. Kay, and to Sarepta for donating some of your time today for our presentation. I am Christine McSherry, a registered nurse, the Executive Director of Jett Foundation, but most importantly, a mom of a 20-year-old with Duchenne. My son, Jett, is enrolled in Study 204, Sarepta's safety study for the advanced patient population, and he's been receiving Eteplirsen for 18 months. Jett took his last step when he was 13. I started the foundation in 2001 with a mission to improve the lives of those affected by Duchenne. The foundation does not have any financial interest in the outcome of this meeting and has not been compensated for this project. As you heard from the sponsor's presentation, FIDASIA gives patients a voice in the drug development process. With this law in mind, we met with CDER officials many times over the last 4 years. It was never our intent for the results of the videos to be part of this AdComm. It was simply intended to bring context and perspective to FDA on outcomes that are meaningful to patients. In the spring of 2012, prior to the release of public data, we heard stories about boys doing well on Eteplirsen. They were small but meaningful things that they had never done prior to taking the drug, like opening bottles of water and bags of chips. Boys with Duchenne often struggle with these types of activities. In April 2013, we met with CDER to discuss the patient experiences that we heard about, and they asked us for video evidence. In June, we returned and presented videos of boys who were jumping into pools, walking their dog, and participating in sports. CDER officials asked us to quantify outcomes important to patients. So as requested in July of 2015, we presented and submitted data on activities of daily living, or ADLs, to FDA. At this meeting, they indicated these results would be included in the review of the Eteplirsen NDA. We collected this information through semi-structured videotaped interviews that included rating scales. Many themes emerged from this data, but due to our limited time today, I'll only be sharing 4 key findings: spontaneous falls, walking after fractures, fatigue, and ADLs. Through social media requests, 8 of the 12 participants in Study 202 agreed to be interviewed. All of these boys were over the age of 7 and in the decline phase of ambulation. And importantly, we interviewed the 3 largest decliners in the study, including the 2 patients who lost ambulation early and a boy who broke his tibia. These interviews took place after the boys had been receiving therapy for 3 years. We also interviewed 3 boys from Study 204. In total, 11 boys participated. Our research led to several key findings, all things that we would never expect to see in the normal progression of Duchenne. The first finding was a decrease in spontaneous falls. Now let's take a look at a video of what a typical fall looks like for a child with Duchenne. This video was taken during a 6-minute walk test. Now watch carefully. We've all tripped. This boy doesn't trip. As you're watching, look at his feet very carefully. He doesn't trip. His quads just give out, giving him no time or warning to brace his fall.
You got 2.5 minutes. You okay? Yeah. Can you keep going? Yeah. Okay.
That is a Duchenne fall. In this instance, the physical therapist is there to pick the boy up off the floor. By the age of 9, the majority of boys with Duchenne are losing the ability to get off the floor themselves. So if this happens when no one is around, the only alternative is to lie and wait until someone comes to find him. Boys of this age are typically gaining independence. In contrast, these boys can no longer be left alone. Now let's listen to how one boy describes his experience falling prior to taking Eteplirsen and then after he's been on therapy.
One of the biggest ones was collapsing. I used to basically just like my legs would come out feel like they come out from under me. I wouldn't know what happened to my legs, and the next thing I know, I was just laying on the ground. That happened a lot before I started drug. I think it was really scary because I didn't know what happened. I was usually just on the floor before I knew it. But since I've gone to the drug, I think I've noticed a lot less of the collapsing. It's easy. I'd say I'm not so worried about it anymore because I know that it usually doesn't happen. I don't even remember when I collapsed last.
I don't even remember when I collapsed last time. Daily diary, spontaneous falls. So the mother of this patient kept a daily diary of his spontaneous falls. The y-axis represents the number of spontaneous falls per day, while the x-axis represents time. This boy started on drug in November of 2014, and he was falling twice a day, and the falls decreased until March of 2015, when his falls stopped. And without the fear of falling, he's able to play soccer, his favorite activity, for an extended period of time. Study 202 at baseline and 3 years later. The y-axis represents the number of falls they experienced at those 2 time points. The gray bars in the red circle represent the 2 boys who lost ambulation early in the trial. And as you can see, they experienced over 4 spontaneous falls a day prior to losing ambulation. The red arrows highlight 4 boys who had been falling anywhere between 5 times a day to twice a week. The yellow bars reveal that over time, they all essentially stopped collapsing. And surprisingly, the red arrows signify that no ambulatory boy is falling 3 years after starting drug. This just doesn't happen with boys who have Duchenne at this stage in their disease. To lead to fractures, which typically marks the end of our son's walking. Families affected by Duchenne have the same fear that you would have of an elderly parent falling and breaking a hip. During our interviews, a highly experienced physical therapist who specializes in Duchenne told us, quote, "If you're 10, 11, or 12 and you break a leg, I'm shocked if you would ever walk again. I would say 9 times out of 10, that's the end of your walking," end quote. Boys with Duchenne are at high risk of a fracture due to corticosteroid use. We learned that 4 boys on Eteplirsen had fractures, yet all 4 regained the ability to walk. For boys their age, it's not what we would expect. We would expect them to never walk again. Key finding number 3, Duchenne-related fatigue. It's important to understand this distinction. Because of Duchenne, these boys reach the point of exhaustion much faster. As the disease advances, they often can't make it through a full day of school. They crash, sleeping for hours. However, 5 of the 8 boys taking Eteplirsen either decreased or maintained their level of fatigue. This is not what we would expect over 3 years. The other 3 boys were the ones who either lost ambulation or experienced a fracture. As I said before, I'm a mom of a 20-year-old boy with Duchenne, and as the disease progresses, these boys are completely exhausted and lose the ability to do everyday things. The simple tasks, such as lifting a spoon to their mouth, feels like they're lifting heavy weights for them. And simple tasks like scratching your nose or turning over in bed become impossible. Earlier in the disease, when boys tire, it leads them to use a wheelchair more often. Let's listen to one boy's experience after being on Eteplirsen. So, how do you get around school?
I don't use anything.
You don't use your feet?
Only my feet.
Oh, okay, good. It's like, Wow, you're pretty magical then. You don't use a scooter?
No.
Is the school pretty big?
Yeah.
And have you always been able to get around school?
No.
No. Do you remember when you couldn't get around to school?
No.
You don't remember not getting around? But you know you couldn't? Yeah. So do you remember your old school?
Yeah.
And did you use anything or you just had trouble?
I used a wheelchair.
You did?
Yeah.
At school?
Yeah.
How often?
Every day.
Every day. When's the last time you used a wheelchair now?
Like a few years ago.
Maintaining the ability to walk, something we take for granted. But this boy is able to walk with his friends. He can walk his dog, and he can play like a normal kid. The loss of ambulation changes every aspect of normal daily living, from accessing a friend's house to taking family vacations to home modifications. It's just endless. Remember, ambulation isn't just about walking. It also benefits bone health, prevents scoliosis, and supports breathing. It touches not just the boy, but everyone else. For the boy that we just heard from, the 6-minute walk test tells a story, but not the whole story. For example, while this boy's 6-minute walk test remained stable, it didn't capture the improvements that we saw. He stopped falling, and his fatigue was reduced. Just looking at the 6-minute walk test, you wouldn't see the improvements in these other important outcome measures. Key finding number 4, participating in life or ADLs. Typically, when boys lose ambulation, they quickly lose upper arm strength. And we fully understand that Eteplirsen is not a cure, and it only slows the progression of the disease. So it was important for us to see if the drug was having a benefit in the non-ambulatory boys. For this reason, we looked at the twin boys who lost ambulation. We assessed 8 activities of daily living that don't involve walking, such as using a computer, feeding oneself, brushing teeth, and using a cell phone. Despite coming off their feet, both boys have maintained the ability to do these activities over the 3-year time frame. This would suggest a benefit in the non-ambulant population. The collective experience tells us that Eteplirsen is having a real and concrete impact on the rate of disease progression. For the boys that we interviewed, who were all between the ages of 10 and 13 and on drug for over 3 years, we saw a decrease in spontaneous falls, the ability to walk after a fracture, and the stabilization or improvement in fatigue, and the maintenance of ADLs in the non-ambulatory boys. In the time that it'll take to complete the confirmatory study, many boys in our community will either lose the ability to walk, to lift their arms, or to breathe. Just 2 short weeks ago, Dr. Janet Woodcock spoke at a breakthrough therapy briefing on Capitol Hill by Friends of Cancer Research. She spoke about type 1 errors, false positives, and type 2 errors, false negatives. In the context of FDA, a type 1 error would be risk of approving drugs that are unsafe or ineffective, whereas a type 2 error is not approving a drug that is safe and effective. She said that type 2 errors are not talked about enough, and there needs to be a balance between the risk of committing a type 1 versus a type 2 error. This afternoon, when you hear the human side of this story, from those who have benefited from this drug, as well as others waiting for treatment, I hope you keep in mind type 2 errors and recognize that there is a very real human cost to making a conclusion that a drug doesn't work when it really does. Thank you.